Welcome to the Faith and Trauma Center podcast, a unique approach to exploring the intersections of religion, trauma, sacred spaces, and mental health.
Each month, we choose a different topic to discuss weekly from different perspectives. The first week, we explore the faith, community, and clergy perspective. The second week, the mental health practitioner perspective. The third week, the perspective of individuals working to heal from religious trauma. And the fourth week, we invite a special guest who has been impacted by our monthly topic to join us.
This format follows the design of the Faith and Trauma Center's 3 pathways for resources and education. We invite you to explore all the additional material that we offer at faithandtraumacenter.org.
Let's jump into this week's conversation. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Faith and Trauma Center podcast. I am one of your hosts, Christy Love, and I'm joined by my co-host and best friend and partner in crime and ministry partner and all the things, Holly Madden. Holly, how are you?
I'm good. Life's been a little crazy.
Yeah, define crazy for me.
We have been in a lovely season of not only did school start back end of or mid-August, so getting into the real rhythm and routine of that. And both my husband and I work for the public school system in the season. My husband's committed educator for life. He's gone back to school to become a principal. But my kiddos that are also both in school, but we've also started the extracurriculars. And so my sweet little almost 8-year-old is in gymnastics this fall or this year. And then my brave little 6-year-old decided to try something for the first time. He's just not he's my homebody. We'll be like, you want to go to the park? And he's like, I just want to be home.
Yeah.
He's my little homebody. So he decided to try soccer. So we've had 3 nights a week where we are committed to events right now. And so that's just been heavy, just busy, but good and beautiful. So we actually got to record a little earlier tonight, though, because our soccer practice was canceled as we got there due to dry lightning. No rain, but lightning and thunder. So we had a fun little drive to get to practice and drive home and all the things. But yeah, otherwise, in battling preschool germs. Other than that, though, I'm surviving. How are you?
Okay. I am good. I am tired. This has just been a really busy ministry season, both for Faith and Trauma Center, as well as at the church that I lead here in Central Washington State. And yeah, just lots of pieces going on, some projects that I've been working on. And so my body is ready for a day off. It's been a little while. So I'm counting down the days. I have one coming up soon, and I am looking forward to just being able to kind of downshift and recharge and all the things. So
yeah,
good times. Good times. So, all right. Well, let's jump into conversation. So all this month, our theme for the podcast has been exploring and talking about growing up in a Christian household. And we've talked about that in the first week of the month. We talked about that in terms of clergy and faith leaders and some things that we need to be aware of, Christian parenting practices, language, cycle breaking, that kind of thing inside of faith communities. In our last conversation, we talked about mental health professionals and how they can support individuals who perhaps that was part of their lived experience, was growing up in a Christian household that may or may not have been complicated and problematic in different ways. And so we are now diving into a conversation specifically geared for individuals who have had that lived experience of growing up in a Christian household where potentially that was not always a positive experience. That definitely could have been something that was a struggle, was a source of tension, has been a source of trauma that they have had to heal from as they have grown through that, or perhaps you are still in that. Maybe you're someone that's already and still a teenager and still at home and navigating that, or a young adult that's living at home. So today we want to talk with you about what that experience is like. We want to share some of our own experiences and kind of resonate with that and share some things that we do. as we go from this place. So I want to acknowledge, Holly, as we start this, we are recording on September the 16th of 2025. We are recording after the death of Charlie Kirk, which happened last week in our country. And I want to acknowledge that because when we talk about growing up in a Christian household, when we talk about being formed by the rhetoric that is around us, I think it is important for us to acknowledge culturally that this individual, very much attributed a lot of the beliefs that he held and the platform that he had and many of the things that he said to his own Christian home upbringing. I think that's important to acknowledge. And two, much of his focus was with individuals that were younger, high school students and college students and young adults, many of which grew up in Christian households as well. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that we are recording this particular conversation in the midst of a pretty significant cultural tension inside of the Christian movement. I think there is a real divisiveness that has been highlighted by this death, and it has highlighted that polarization of progressive Christianity, conservative Christianity, the stark difference between the two, the way that words matter. And so I think that's important for us to name with this framework, because that's not necessarily something that I think is being named in the media right now, is the role of that Christian upbringing and that framework of being immersed in Christianity and having that shape so much of your worldview and all of those pieces, and just kind of sometimes that isolation even of not having a lot of balance in other voices and what that can lead to, what that can look like.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, I think that's really important to vocalize. And I think it's, in light of that, horrific situation, just to name politically, religiously, like whatever you believe, around his death, the topic is gun violence, which that topic in of itself is horrific. And there are too many people that one person is too many people to lose their life to gun violence. In that whole situation, there's so much trauma around that and horror. And at the same time, it's also important to be able to acknowledge some of the harm that was caused by a lot of those messages, especially in a lot of events like that, and to hold space for both those things, that, disagreements are important to who we are as we grow and we develop as a culture, but it should never lead to that ever.
And let's talk about that for a second, Holly, because especially, talking from this lived experience lens, for those of you that are listening today, you've most likely shared this experience, and religion in some way has probably been harmful and traumatic, hence the reason you're hanging out with us at the Faith and Trauma podcast. But I think one of the things that's really critical to name, kind of taking that thread of that tragedy and building on it, is one of the things that I experienced growing up in a Christian household is I was never taught the skill set of how to disagree. Because being raised in a framework where questioning or disagreement was seen as rebellious, there was never good, healthy, differentiating dialogue modeled for me until I got to high school. And I was an athlete growing up, not a great one. I don't know if I can call myself an athlete. I played sports, but I got hurt my freshman year of high school.
You suffered for sports.
Something like that. But anyway, I I got hurt, and so I couldn't play sports anymore. I got hurt playing volleyball, and I had played, volleyball, basketball, softball, swimming, all the things. And I tried to figure out something new, and a friend said, "Hey, I'm doing speech and debate. You should come and hang out with us." And so I did, and I fell in love with debate, and I fell in love with learning how to structure arguments and learning how to back up everything I said with evidence and learning how to research points and so much of that shapes who I am today. But that was not a skill set that I had ever been exposed to in my household, in church experiences, in youth group, in Sunday school. It was very much, if you question, that's an act of rebellion and that's wrong. And so, fast forward to what we're experiencing today and this level of polarization in this country, I think one of the things we have to name is that there is an epidemic of not knowing how to disagree with one another. And so much of what we are seeing in that disagreement revolves around faith. And it revolves around the differences in faith and, kind of this schism, this divide that's happening between progressive Christians and evangelical Christians, conservative Christians. And you've just kind of got this widening gap. And conversations, connections, relationships have always been what kind of built the bridge across that gap. And I think those are becoming harder and harder to navigate now because if we disagree, so many of us, the tendency is, I'm going to block you. I'm going to unfriend you. I'm going to put a boundary in place. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. And sadly, I think a lot of that was learned in Christian households.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I think that like processing some of that, I think that there's these roots of being raised in a Christian home where so much of the narrative that surrounded me, and I'd imagine it's very similar for most people that grew up in a Christian home, um, like it like I don't think I've even had processed that. Like, oh, I don't know if I was ever taught to learn how to disagree, but I know what I was definitely taught was what we believe is right and what everybody else believes is wrong. And then there was so much fear based with that. And it was like, because it was an eternity conversation. It was like, if you believe this, then your heart and your heart's here, like then you're bound for hell. And so there was so much that I absorbed that was around, we're right. And if you're wrong, it's my responsibility to change your mind. But there was also like that, like not a whole lot of skill set taught in how to do that. It was just kind of this urgency of like, and being so little and being taught that like our whole role, our whole job was like evangelistic and it was um to change their minds so that they would have eternal life in heaven and like all of that kind of language. And I remember feeling like the weight of that responsibility felt like so overwhelming. While I was at the very same time, like, I don't even know if I believe what I'm supposed to. Like, so then there was this whole battle inside of me that was like, if I can't even wrap my little brain around this or feel like I can believe this fully, like, what does that mean about me? That means I'm a bad person. That means I'm like sinful and something's wrong with me. And like, there was so much of that was internalized. But there wasn't this even if the language, like, I think that there were times where it was like, we need to respect one another, we need to love one another. But then it was like, you need to change their mind so that they're bound for heaven. That then there was this piece of like never being told or taught to like respect what other people believe and to genuinely like want to hear them out and to understand the roots of that. And I think like so much of my heart as a future counselor, like being in grad school now and like processing that and just like the work that we've done, like when someone tells me something, I'm always so curious. Like, I just want to know, like, why do you believe that? Where does that come from? Because so much of it comes from, well, my grandparents, or I was raised here, or this experience happened to me. And that curiosity is just so eye-opening to like why people believe and think the way they do. But like never being given that. And my sweet little I love the way my almost 8-year-old looks at the world. Because we've tried to parent in a way that's like, if my daughter asks me what I believe, I'll tell her. But I've also like, if she's like, oh, what do we believe about this issue, Mom? I'm like, well, what do you believe? And I try to like let her tell me and hear her very beautiful, very pure perspectives on reality and spirituality in the world right now. And it's deep and it's profound and wanting to nurture that in her. But there's this very raw piece of her that's just like, well, if we have to make a decision and that decision
Yeah.
hurts somebody, don't do it. Like that's literally her belief
Right.
system. And I
Right.
love that.
And I think a lot of that, I don't know about you, Holly, but like in my experience, I think a lot of that goes back to this issue of control, right? We talk about in the work that I do, the research that I do, I talk about 10 negative religious experiences that we can boil a lot of things down to. And one
Hmm.
of those is controlling caregivers. And I think when we look at the levels of control and kind of this control narrative that oftentimes is just really prevalent in many Christian households, there is this element of trying to control who speaks into you, what you're exposed to, what levels of other ways of thinking that you're around, right? And so I can control the kind of music that you listen to, the movies that you watch, what you dress, who you spend time with. And as long as I can control this, then I can make sure you're not exposed to some of
Hmm.
these different worldviews or try. And so again, not only are we not taught how to disagree, many times there's just not an exposure to
Hmm.
differing opinions because there very much is, kind of that Christian bubble that people try to put kids into that
Yeah.
says, I don't want them to be tempted by the world, right? That kind of language. I remember hearing that a lot. Or, I don't want them to be of the world and those kind of things. And so when we're not teaching the kids how to navigate that, how to experience that, how to have cultural competency and how to deal with and recognize and process through, different levels of experience and different levels of belief and how to do that respectfully and how to have those dialogues, we come out on the other side of that
Hmm.
very unaware. And then you really do have this very staunch us versus them kind of mindset. And I think, that is so much, in my personal opinion, what has shaped our culture in this country over the last, 10, 15 years. It has
Yeah.
just been this kind of growing wave of us versus them, and
Mm.
the majority of it is rooted in this Christian hierarchy, right? That white Christian nationalist kind of perspective on the world has this controlling narrative that says if you're different then I need to be separated from. Instead of talking about it, dialoguing, finding common ground, we just distance and we label that as something that's dangerous or bad or liberal or whatever. And
Hmm.
we've created and furthered that us versus them kind of piece. And again, it's rooted in this piece of growing up around that kind of controlling rhetoric.
Yeah. And I would like pull apart that concept of control a lot and just like get to the root of that. Like, what is the roots of this like drive for control? And especially in that Christian context, I think so much of it, although it manifests completely differently and for so many people, different experiences, but the root of that is fear-based and it's anxiety-based. It's very much that like I'm afraid that if you listen to this music, that it will pull you away from God. And if it pulls you away from God, then like we won't spend eternity together. And like it's that like spiral. And I definitely like I talk about this like I've had a really unique experience that like I got to deconstruct my faith alongside my husband, alongside my best friend. Like we did that together while we were in church ministry. And over the last several years, especially like watch my parents even deconstruct their own faith. And so I've had a very, in some ways, lucky experience with that, that there's been a lot of that, like seeing those journeys come to certain points in a similar timelines. But like I see that in the way my parents parented. Like I see so much now. I look back now and what I experienced as a child, I can now see as a parent as like you were afraid. Like you were
Mhm.
so afraid. And it manifested this way as those elements of control. Like I can vividly remember like my parents were very, and I think so much love went into it. Like, but we were Christian music for
Mhm.
like what we listened to, but my parents were very much into like Dan Fogelberg and the Eagles and like all this like classic music. So I grew up with that culture, and then it was like being given these like modern day Christian music CDs and stuff, and was like exposed to all of that. And I can vividly remember getting like my first MP3 player and like hiding under my covers while I tuned it to the radio to listen to other radio stations. And I can remember like hiding under my covers because I felt so much shame about doing that, but like I wanted that experience. And I think the control piece, and I think so many people can relate to this, like often, you either really, really absorb that and that becomes your identity is like, I love this music and this is who I am, or you become really rebellious. It's like, no. And, my little like tuning the station to like 98.8 in Colorado, where it was like listening to like pop music, like that was my earliest probably rebellion of that, of like, I want to listen to something different. I want to be exposed to these other pieces. And from there it just kind of spiraled. But yeah, that rebellious piece. But I think it's important to note that so many times like parents parented like that because they were afraid, not just because there was.
I agree with you. I do. I agree with you. I agree with you on fear, but I also think there's another piece to it. And
Hmm.
the thing that I think is that fear has been generational and cyclical,
Hmm.
and there wasn't a model in place, right? For how to question that. Because you think about, like, we're talking about our own experiences and our parents, but I think about that like when I listen to my parents talk about their grandparents, or if I've listened to my grandparents talk about their parents, and kind of this going back, especially if you live and were raised in a household where faith has been generational, right? That there's kind of always been this fear-based controlling narrative that even though culture and the world may have looked different, there was still this box, right,
Hmm.
that was kind of protected. And I think about that because I don't know that there was a good model
Hmm.
for Christian parenting in terms of how do we engage with the world, right? What does that look like? And I think what we see happening right now all around us is you do have this large wave. We talked about this on a previous podcast around this topic. You do have this large wave of people who have deconstructed and who are trying to figure out a new balance. And like you were talking about with your oldest, right? Trying to figure out how to ask, well, what do you think about that? And
Hmm.
giving them some critical thinking skills and being open to that conversation and breaking some of those cycles of control and have to create the narrative for them, but giving them some autonomy to be instrumental in, shaping their worldview. And what does that look like a little bit, and exposing them to a little bit more than that. You know,
Yeah.
I think about conversations that I've had with my own family and parents, um, and I have different experiences, right? My parents split up when I was in middle school, and it's kind of like two paths that diverged in a woods a little bit, right? And one kind of went one way and one went the other. And I have watched one who has been willing um, to be challenged a little bit, and has been willing to explore a little bit more, and has been willing to expand the box a little bit more. Maybe not a whole lot, but enough that like I see that and I recognize that. Um,
In some really important ways too. Like,
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I felt called into full-time ministry, I was raised in a tradition originally that does not ordain women. I was raised in a tradition where I could not teach or preach. And I remember being terrified to have those conversations with parents and with grandparents.
Mhm.
Um, one, I still have the card that they wrote me that said, I see this in you. I believe in you and I'm cheering you on. I'll always be on the front row of your cheering section. And it meant the world to me, right? Like I'm willing to figure out what this is and how to flex with you and grow with you. The other was very much like not an option. Don't question it. Not going to talk about it. Not up for debate. Not going to go there. And so this unwillingness to grow and to be challenged, to be questioned, I think that's where we also see a lot of those patterns of estrangement that are
Yeah.
happening for a lot of people. We see a lot of that adult child estrangement, especially in our current political climate, with people who were raised in this background and have tried to deconstruct and have tried to move and grow and explore, and they find a lot of pushback as an adult still in
Mhm.
that space. That's really complicated, and I just want to like affirm that
Yeah.
for listeners who that may be your experience. That's part of my experience. It's hard, it's painful, it's difficult, um, but I think being willing to set some boundaries and being willing to articulate your needs and those kind of things, those are critical and really important.
Mhm.
But I recognize there is so much grief that is wrapped up in that. And I think we don't always talk about the
Yeah.
grief of adult children who grew up in those contexts, who look back and have to kind of grieve some of the experiences they have and the box that they were put in, and the impact that that has on their adult relationships.
I also think on the other side of that, and that's that's huge. That is so huge. And I think grief is something that we never want to tiptoe around, and like we need to have more and more permission to grieve some of those experiences. I also think on the whole other side of that, there's these really beautiful moments where, especially if you are parenting or if you are in a position of being able to speak into the next generation and you find yourself like breaking a cycle or like shifting that so dramatically that it feels like this huge, massive win. And I think one of those is around the gender experience. And for my little girl has obviously been raised around us and getting to like honestly, genuinely, the only pastor she's ever genuinely had has been you.
Mhm.
I think the early days of those seasons of getting to walk you through your journey of ordination and like moving into like before we church planted, like she was a newborn. Like she helped start TCG and then she learned to walk on the sidewalk of that. So like I think that there's been this so much exposure to that, the language she's had with us that I vividly remember being probably like first grade. And I got into my car from my elementary school and I remember sitting in my little booster seat in the back seat of my mom's Subaru Outback and like buckling up and then having this like existential crisis when I was grew up. And I don't know what it was about existential crisis. I remember like laying my head on the desk, looking out the window, thinking like I'm not going to be able to grow up. Like this life is too scary. So I don't know. There was something that happened in that
Little
scene.
Enneagram 4, Holly.
Right. Deep, yeah. I'm like trying to learn how to like add numbers, and I'm like, how the heck am I supposed to exist in this world? So I get in the car and I'm like talking to my mom, and I'm like going through like, I want to be maybe a zoologist or a veterinarian, and these were some of the things I really wanted to be when I was little. I really wanted to be a marine biologist, although I'm like I was terrified of swimming, so like don't understand where that came from. But
Everybody went through that phase. It's
yes.
okay.
So I'm like processing this with my mom, and I vividly remember my mom saying, Holly, you can be anything you want to be. You could be the president of the United States, just not a pastor. Like 6-year-old little me was like, that's confusing. Like I remember
Right.
that. Like I could run a country, but not a church. Like that
Mhm.
doesn't make sense. So like there
Right.
was this piece of me that I remember being like, that doesn't make sense, but still like went with it because that's what that
Right.
was that world for me and what I was taught. And stepping into church leadership as an adult. My parents have been very supportive of that. But like I was talking to Ellie, my daughter, about it recently, and she was talking about like what she wanted to be when we grew up, and we had a very similar conversation. And she's like been dead set on being a hairdresser
Yeah.
and something else. So it was like a hairdresser and the president of the United States, a hairdresser and be a veterinarian is the new one. And I love that there's an and there and there's these two things. And we've always just been like, it's whatever you want to do, baby. Like, we can talk a little bit about like college versus trade school versus like going to work after high school and like having those conversations early and just like supporting her. And there was a long season there where she would say pastor, and I remember her talking about like, well, maybe I'll be a pastor like my Aunt Christy. And I was like, you can be a pastor. And then I just felt like led to like have this conversation. Like, did you know that there's a lot of people that don't believe that women can be pastors? And like, that's what I was taught growing up. And my daughter was like, that's stupid. And like that phrase from her, like poured
Mhm.
through me, just like, yeah,
Mhm.
like we did it.
Yeah. And it's
We
like,
did it.
yeah, so healing that there wasn't a disclaimer or a
Yeah.
caveat on you can be anything but.
Yes. And so I want to name that. Like there are moments of wins and there's moments of grief and there's moments where there's both of those in the same
Yeah.
spaces. And I think it's beautiful to be able to see that journey of deconstruction and how that manifests as you are loving on maybe the next generation, whatever context that is.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. You know, I think as we kind of round this corner here today, I think one of the things I would ask maybe as we kind of finish up, Holly, what is something, if you were sitting and having coffee with one of our listeners one on one and just had a chance to kind of listen to their story a little bit and, could share something with them as a word of encouragement, a piece of your own experience trying to heal from that real rigidity of a very strict religious upbringing.
Mhm.
Is there something that comes to your mind that you would offer to somebody in kind of that moment of trying to heal, trying to unpackage, trying to connect the dots?
Yeah, I think, and I think to be really honest about I think in processing this podcast I had this very weepy moment where I had this like awareness in me of like here are pieces that have been so like overt of things that I've deconstructed and worked through and like can say like I don't doubt once anymore that women can lead, like that's never something that I battle anymore. And then there's these other things, especially really internal things that are still wounds that I still carry, that still affect my parenting, like that still affect my relationships. And like you said, the grief of that. And I think for me, one of those, and I feel like this is probably something that's really common, is that when you grow up in a environment where making a mistake has
Mm,
such an eternal like emphasis and that it's such a like personhood experience that you make a mistake and there's often narratives around what is in you that made you do that. And
mm,
like as I'm in this season now, especially of, this over this last decade really of healing and understanding and being in grad school and like, then there's all these pieces of me that's like, well, what about emotional regulation and like the power of emotions? Like, hey, Enneagram 4 over here, like emotions rule my world. That's not a
mhm,
bad thing. What about basic needs being met? Like the things we do when we're hungry, when we're tired, living in a society where we're exhausted and so many times our words and behaviors come out of that place of I am just exhausted or I'm extremely burned out and there's not an out for me. There's not a rest for me that I can take. Um, that experience of being like being dopamine seeking or like all of our different like mental experiences that we have, like for me understanding my ADHD diagnosis and like that piece of me that can be impulsive because I'm seeking the dopamine and those things and understanding on a cellular level what was going on with my body that I had no language for when I was 6 and 14 and 17 and in a very dark, very impulsive season of my life, and how so much of that narrative whether it was said overtly with words or it was internalized,
Mhm.
that I took into me as a child, that my mistakes make me bad, that there's something wrong with me, to the point where still making mistakes is such a shameful thing for me. And it's
Right.
something that I have to consistently work through. And so I wanted to share that because I feel like there's a lot of people that still carry that. And that's one of those things that still comes up even in the midst of like deconstructing and feeling a lot of freedom and empowerment. And those little shame pieces still come and trigger us in that place. And just this piece of like, you were never bad. You were
Mhm.
never not good enough. You were never less than. You were never too much. And to just like go back and just like love on that little inner child of you. And just
Mhm.
like, you've always been beautiful. You've always been wonderful. You were created so uniquely, and you in your entire personhood is holy and beautiful and meant to grow and develop and meant to make mistakes. That's good and that's okay. And
Mhm.
we grow from our mistakes. We seek repairs and we grow together in relationship, and there's so much design around that.
Mhm.
And to just be able to like sit in that space of like, I don't know, taking back your worth from
Mhm.
those places.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. As someone who was often told that I was too much,
Hmm.
that I asked too many questions, that's a really beautiful healing word. So I appreciate that. And I have a feeling that there are a lot of people listening to that who needed to hear that. So I'm glad that you lifted that up. I think for me, one of the things that I would say is a word of encouragement is I am acutely aware that many people who are trying to do the work of understanding their journey, healing from their journey, growing through their journey, that first of all, that experience is unique and there is no cookie cutter pattern for how to do it. And
Hmm.
progress is not linear. Their healing is not linear, right? Some days it's going to be up and round and messy and look like a hot mess. And other days it's going to feel a little bit more linear. I think having grace with yourself is really important. But I also just want to name that if you have had the experience of growing and your growth has required you or challenged you or put you at a crossroads where you had to make some decisions, and that may have been leaving faith spaces,
Hmm.
that may have been putting boundaries in place with family members that you're have complicated dynamics with right now. That may be your faith system has changed. Your theology has changed. Maybe you've walked away from faith and that's been part of your journey. Um, I know that for many of us who have had to come to those crossroads and have had to make difficult decisions, um, getting vilified for those decisions, especially from the family that raised you, is a really painful experience. Um, to be labeled as dangerous or to be labeled as sinful, to be written off as the prodigal kid or the black sheep or whatever,
The last
imaginative
one.
language you get labeled with. Um,
Hmm.
I also just want to name and recognize that healing, as someone who maybe has had that experience being raised in a Christian household and maybe you've had to put some distance there, um, that can be really lonely. It can be
Hmm.
really isolating. And so I just want to encourage you to find community,
Hmm.
find people. Um, even if it's for a season, that you have to carve out some found family to be able to surround yourself with on holidays, to be able to share birthdays with, to be able to celebrate good days and to cry together on hard days, and to have a place to vent that is safe and affirming and supportive. That is so critically important. And so, as your healing journey continues, you never know how some of those relationships may come back around. You never know how some of those things may shift and change. And so I just encourage you, hold all things with a loose hand, but be very, very gentle with yourself and recognize that you cannot heal in isolation. And so if you have had to isolate from, biological family, from adopted family, from parents or siblings or grandparents or whatever that has looked like, my hope and my heart for you is that you are able to find people to heal with, because I think we learn from each other. We draw energy from each other. We draw solidarity and strength from each other when we are on similar healing journeys, similar faith journeys, similar deconstruction journeys. And so that would be my word of encouragement to you, is that if you feel isolated and alone, don't just stay in that place. Make sure that you are really trying to find some people that can speak into you, and people of different generations too, I think is important. I came out here to Central Washington a year ago, and I think one of the things that's been really a beautiful, unanticipated experience for me has been how many older individuals, in their 90s and 80s and 70s and 60s, with a beautiful, social justice, progressive heart, want to help make the world a better place, have just really, really been instrumental in helping me heal some pieces of my own journey, growing up in a faith-filled household and getting to experience what that could look like, has just been really beautiful. So
I love that.
yeah. Any final thoughts from you?
No, I think just I'm grateful for these conversations. I'm grateful for everyone who exists in the complexity of these spaces. Because I think there's just profound generational healing that is occurring, despite existing in a time where there is so much just awfulness in this world, and to hold that close to the heart, that there is light, that you are a light creator, and not in, that in this really beautiful movement of healing and empowerment and rediscovery of who we are, and all of those beautiful things. And so just really grateful for everyone that is on this journey.
And I would just, my final thought before we wrap up is just, I recognize that these are triggering times. When faith and Christian nationalism and, divisions rooted in faith and faith rhetoric and religion and all of it is front page news every single day. And you're just, trying to heal and to move through and to put pieces together and connect dots for yourself, let alone all of the cultural components that come with just our country and the world that we're living in right now. I recognize that this is kind of a triggering constant barrage. And so, find ways. I really encourage you to visit faithandtraumacenter.org. There's some great healing resources and supportive resources. Holly's got some yoga flows that are on there to just kind of help you release tension and ground your body, being aware of those somatic pieces that we hold in when we're constantly triggered and our muscles are tight and our digestive system's constantly angry and our neck is tense and we've got headaches and all the things. You've also got some great art therapy pieces and some meditations. And so I invite you to use those as tools to help you navigate these difficult days, because we acknowledge them and we are traveling them all together, as we're constantly kind of trying to hold this tension of healing and exposure all the time that we just can't avoid these days.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be back next week. We've got a special friend that's going to be joining us. I'm excited to add this component to our new podcast. And so on the last week of every month, we'll have someone coming on to kind of share their story of this month's topic. And so we'll have someone join us next month, a good friend of you and they will be sharing their own experience of growing up in a Christian household, a faith-based household, how that was challenging, some of the things that they've had to do on their journey, some of the crossroads they've come to, some of the choices they've had to make, and some of the ways that they've healed and what that's looked like. So I'm looking forward to learning from their experience together next time.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you guys back next week.